DAW Nation, welcome to this episode of In the DAW. We are going to be breaking down Elliot Berger and Laura Brehm's song, Believe. In this episode, you're going to learn about vocal processing, super saws, multiband processing, mixing drums, how to use NEUTRON by IZOTOPE, and so much more. And we're going to get into it right now. I want to welcome you to this episode of In the DAW. We have Elliot Berger breaking down his song, Believe, that he did with Laura Brehm. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Couple of announcements before we get started. This is a companion series to our podcast, Behind the DAW, where we interview music producers, artists, musicians, music industry experts, people of that nature on an emotional, philosophical, and artistic level. If you're interested, link in the description. We actually did one with Laura Brehm, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. A couple of links down in the description that I want to talk about. Link number one is for the Patreon. If you want to make sure that we can keep bringing you these type of interviews forever for free, go ahead and check that out. It's $1 a month. It just helps us keep going. Second thing is for suggestions. If you want to suggest someone to come on the show, there's a link down in the description. Go ahead and click on that. Number three is for private lessons. If you want private lessons in electronic music production or social media marketing, please, there's a link. Click it. The fourth one is if you want the free preset that Elliot used in this song, sounds like this. Go ahead, click on it. It's free. Go ahead. Come on, man. It's just free. Come on, grab it. And then finally, if you want to enter to win a 20-minute free social media consultation, there's a link down in there.
I see it's quite common that you do multi-band compression first in your processing chain, and it's quite nice not to see it just being the same OTT that everyone seems to throw on everything. So, yeah, what's the multi-band compression doing roughly?
I put it on things generally to bring out brightness, so I'll stick it on buses usually. So this is the synth bus here, so that. So this is everything that's kind of being sidechained, and it just helps to bring out the kind of noise and the shine. And fill out the full range. I actually use the multi-band compression preset, and it pretty much as is. Occasionally, I'll stick a utility in front of it just to not drop down the input gain going into it, rather than adjusting the input on each band, just because it's quicker. Fills out the range, brings out brightness, and it also helps to gel stuff together when you've got however many tracks are in this. All kind of layered up to give that one full sound. You need something to sort of gel them together, and I find that this does it much better than single band compression does.
Question about Laura's vocal processing. Did you do it yourself or did she do it?
So I do it myself. So she does all of the tuning, comping, all the rest of that. The vocal stems I get anyway are pretty solid.
Trying to hear music from silence.
So it's really good takes. The pitching is always perfect. The recording is really good. And then the processing that I do is really simple. It's the same with I always process everything as simply as I can. I'm not a fan of going in and being like really hardcore with everything. I usually do a high pass first to get rid of any rumble. As I said, these takes are usually fine anyway, but it's more force of habit than anything else. If you're getting a take from someone who maybe isn't recording in a good space, there'll be all sorts of rubbish in the low end. So I tend to get rid of that and then do some compression. The reason I'm getting rid of the rumble before the compressor is otherwise that rumble is going to start messing with your levels going into the compressor, so it'll start.
And you're doing really gentle compression, right? I mean, it's only like 2 dB. I mean, how much gain reduction are you getting?
Very, very little. That's only a few dB. It depends on the track. So I've got another tune with Laura that we're working on at the moment, and the compression on that's much harder. But I think because particularly at this point of the tune, in the verses, hopefully it will play fine. It's all quite spacey and quite ambient, so having a really compressed in-your-face vocal at that point is going to sound a bit out of place. So I kind of give it room to breathe. And then Pro MB, I duck down the low mids and kind of doing some de-essing on here. Find if you multi-band out that kind of, it's acting more as a dynamic EQ actually really, but when you're working with those low mid frequencies, sometimes they can pop out. I've had vocalists where it's really resonant. Usually if they're using like a cheaper mic or something, then it really pops out. But it helps to kind of even it out and soften the vocal. And then, as I said, that's sort of acting as a de-esser.
Just to comment on what you were saying about the multiband. A few weeks ago, I had Crywolf come and stay with me, and we were recording a Spotify ad. Here's a picture. He was saying the exact same thing with the Pro MB. He always does that to his vocals, and he always does exactly what you did with like the magenta looking one in the low mid.
I find that frequency is a real problem frequency with vocals because it's what's going to be clashing with everything else, and it's doing very, very little. I mean, it's like 2 to 3 dB, but it makes such a difference and really softens it out. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that I stumbled upon and then was just like, I do this all the time now without fail.
I'm sorry, so keep going. So the next one is the de-esser.
Tiny bit of de-essing. You can see it's doing quite a lot. I think because of the way the lyrics are, there's quite a lot of sibilance, so it helps to just sort of control that. Otherwise, it can sound pretty horrendous. So it just tames out that sort of top end. Then Pro R, with again notching out. I mean, this is an old track. I don't know if I would necessarily do that now, but it's some really like harsh getting rid of any of the low frequency.
Trying to hear music from silence.
I'm sure there was a reason that I did that when I did it. And then Pro Q2 again.
Trying to hear music from silence.
Just to duck that frequency out. I might have sort of overreacted with the way that I processed it, but it's all sort of about controlling it. And it's the same with anything. If you've not got a good recorded take to start with, it makes your life so much harder. If you've got a good vocalist and a good take and it's all recorded properly, you don't have to do very much at all to it to get it to kind of stand out and sit well over everything.
Do you tend to mix your vocals first and then get everything working around them, or do you work on the synths and stuff first and then try and fit the vocals around that?
Bits of both. For this track, the instrumental was done, we kind of wrote it together, but while she was traveling over to mine, I had a bit of time, so I started it. I kind of had the ideas, and as she was writing vocal, I was writing the synth work. But I tried to do most of the instrumental before I put the vocal in, so you can keep the focus on keeping the instrumental interesting and evolving and changing all the time, rather than putting a good vocal over it and being like, oh, this is fine, this is great, and letting the vocal carry it. Because actually, there's something I think quite special about having a tune, and every time you hear it, there's like an intricacy that you maybe didn't notice before, or there's something that keeps it moving, rather than having a really killer vocal sitting over an instrumental that actually isn't really doing very much. And it's a really easy trap to fall into. As I said, like I fall into that trap. Even if I've got the vocal first, I'll try and do as much of the instrumental as possible around, and then make the vocal fit to that. But also consciously, you have to be aware that as you're making it, there's going to be a vocal there. So like not putting loads and loads of stuff in the mids, because then you're going to have a load of problems later on. Yeah, so instrumental first is the short answer to that.
Let's get into your super saw sound design, man. So right now I'm doing private lessons. I'm giving this guy private lessons, and he asked me, when it comes to super saws, really finding we don't know how to. He asked me this question. I don't know how to answer it, but it's like with a super saw, like the super saws that you have here, and people like Seven Lions and Trivecta and Millennium, all that kind of stuff. Your guys' super saws. Like there's something about like the mid and the low mids that are so powerful that just like punch you in the nose. And it's almost like a tonal noise, but noise can't be tonal because noise isn't tonal. So with that in mind, how do you do that? Like what would you suggest in that kind of situation?
So a lot of it's layering. So if I was writing this first, the chords are really, really important. I could take all of these sounds and have a different chord progression that wasn't written very well, and it wouldn't have that same impact. And I've done that before. I've had tunes where I've been struggling with a super saw, and I've gone to an old tune that's worked and taken the preset, like drag and dropped the preset with all the processing and everything, and it doesn't work. So the super saw itself, the main lead one, this one here, is taken and edited from a remix that I did of Virtual Riot, which had kind of similar range in terms of chord voicing, so it did work in this instance. But 2 saws, a tiny bit of noise, this filter here, but it's only got the noise running through it. Otherwise you get low end. I don't always add noise as a note, but I did in this instance. And then loads of voices, detuning, all of this ends up being quite straightforward. And then I have an LFO just doing the imagine, just doing the volume, which gives it that kind of stuttering sound. And then multiband compression to bring out the tops in this instance, and then taking the low out. The bit that you're, I think, on about is layering this kind of stuff with it, which sits in the low mids and is like a really noisy sound by default. So if I unfreeze it, and this is a sound I made ages and ages ago and I've kind of tweaked over time. So if you add it with the saws, what it does is it fills out that low mid range, but also some of that noisy top end harmonics creeps into the super saw as well. And so the two of them work quite well together. Yeah, just a bunch of sort of various processing on it. So I've taken off loads of the top end, but with a softer slope. So some of it's still creeping in, but because we've got so much from all of this, it's not like overbearing. It's really easy when you're stacking these kind of sounds and like stacking all the supersaws and stuff to end up with way too much top end. You have to sort of control that slightly. That's sort of what that's doing. And then layering up with this, which is exactly a preset. It's copied everything from there, but I bumped it up an octave. I don't know if that shows particularly well, but there's a pitch shifter on it. It's nudged it up an octave, and then I've just high passed it. So that layers really well done. And it's quite quiet in the mix, like if that's at 0, bear in mind it's the same preset. This one's at like minus 18 dB, so it's significantly lower. And then I think probably just this one, which is, if I recall correctly, a Cymatics preset. Yeah, Cymatics fake strings. He copied the MIDI over from the chords above, changed it slightly so it moves in a different way. And added a couple of extra notes to it. Put the arpeggiator on and set it to chord trigger. So rather than having to go into the MIDI and like edit each individual chord to get it to the right pattern, you can just set that to trigger the chord every 8th. And so all of them layered together without all the extra bits. In fact, if I set it like that, it all stacks up to create that. So it's all like the sum of parts rather than one individual preset. As I said, like people tend to, you know, try with one or try out a load of noise or whatever, and it just doesn't work.
And for the mids layer, is that I see it's playing individual notes. Is that the root note from the chords above, or just the lowest down notes? Or
yeah, so it'll be the root notes. I tend to, when I'm building up chords anyway, the lowest note tends to be the root. I don't tend to do inversions too much. If it wasn't the root note, I'd always make sure it at the very least follows the sub. So if I do want to have maybe the third of the chord instead in the root, if that's in the sub, then I'll replicate that in the mids. So then at least the low end is kind of moving together. So it sounds like one cohesive sound. You can get away with like moving notes around in chords and stuff because they're kind of more top end. But anything in the low end sounds a bit odd when you're like kind of moving differently. In this case, yes, but not always.
What was the beginning piano that you used? I love that. It was so gorgeous.
Alicia's keys, I would imagine. I use it on everything, but really low velocity on everything. I can't play keys at all. I just type it all in. Yeah, low-ish velocity. This is higher than I would normally use actually. Sometimes you'll see stuff and it's like all the way down here. I used to go in and like adjust every note. But if you go into the groove, doesn't matter which one you use, set everything to 0 and then turn the random up, then it will randomize the notes around when they come in. So it makes it feel more human, and you just adjust that value to whatever you need. As I said, I used to do it normally and then was doing a tune with Direct. And he was like, why don't you just do this? And that talks to me like I was some kind of idiot and I didn't know. But it works and it saves so much time. And another thing I tend to do is just low pass them as well. The top end of pianos can sound a little bit cheesy sometimes. And then again, Pro MB, just to take out the low mids, because in Alicia's keys, like the low mids are a bit. And then again, tiny bit of compression and some reverb. And that's probably the same. There's like a couple of pianos that come in later on. In fact, no, maybe not in this tune. But anytime I'm doing any sort of piano, it's pretty much exactly the same thing.
So you mentioned that you don't play keys. So how do you personally melodically design the song? Is it just like click and drag and stretch?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I just drew it all in, everything. There's a guitar part in here, which is recorded. He says that's because it's got a filter, which I recorded in myself, but I've obviously like had to time stretch quite vigorously to get it in time. I used to play violin, so I was like classically trained musically, so I know where the chords should go and what they should do and all the rest of it. Like that makes sense to me. I just can't play keys. I'll usually sort of, as soon as I've got my root notes in, I know how the chords will form around that. And that bit becomes more of like a science is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Like it becomes more sort of strict. But everything else is sort of put a chord in, doesn't sound good, yes, where should it go next? And doing all of that by ear. But also I think when you're writing anything like this, you sort of have go-to chords. Like I know that if this is an F, I know that the 6th chord sounds good. So start on a 6th chord because that will make it feel more uplifting because it's a major chord. And then, okay, well, we've gone 6 and 7, so the logical place for me to then go is 1 and all the rest of it. So it's sort of a mixture of everything as to how I kind of compose these sort of stuff.
What is it? It looks like you're stacking drums there. Do you then process, it looks like the snares stacked, I'm guessing, from the small bits of white. So do you process all of that together afterwards or leave it up to mastering?
My general rule with mastering, potentially more so nowadays than it was when I did this, is that the better compressed you can get your mix, and the less work a mastering engineer has to do, the better. Especially if you're doing something that could be played out, it has to be loud. Like, you've got no option about it. And so making your mix as loud as possible without doing any master processing at all then means that when it goes off to mastering, or when you come to master it yourself, you haven't got to slam everything into a limiter and it's not sort of breaking up. Everything is processed separately, and there's like a snare bus here. But anytime I'm busting anything, there's some form of compression going on. So, for example, the snares here, there are 3 snares, and I don't usually compress individual samples because they're usually compressed anyway. They're then all kind of EQs, reverb when necessary, and then that runs into a soft clipper here. The soft clipping in the glue compressor is great. Like, you can usually push it quite hard before it really breaks up, kind of slamming that to a point that it evens out. And then again on the bus for the whole drums, the full parallel preset, and then NEUTRON, which probably has some form of something going on in it. Okay, so it's just EQ, and then limiting here, which isn't doing that much, but it's sort of, especially with drums, because you get such short transients, it helps to sort of control that a little bit. And as I said, like, you know, over on here on the sidechain bus as well, there's another limiter, like squashing everything at individual stages.
On your drum bus, you had NEUTRON. Can you explain to the viewers what NEUTRON is and why it's important? My
general use for NEUTRON is it's great as like it's a multi-processing tool in the same way that like Ozone or whatever is, but it's great for finding resonances in your sound. So this actually hasn't done too much, but you can click the track assistant button, play your audio, and it will analyze the audio, which I think Ozone does now as well. And we'll analyze the audio and then put processing with one. I tend to turn off the exciter. It would have changed. You can see it's got various settings on here. I've turned all of that off. But the EQ, as I said, is great. If there's like a tiny frequency in your kick drum that's maybe jumping out too much, or something in your, like a ring on your snare, it's a really good way of taming it, ducking it down a little bit. So that's all I use it for. But as I said, it's got all sorts of different bits in it, including 2 compressors. And it will also reorder all the processing for you, depending on what it thinks you would want. So sometimes you'll have the first compressor right at the start of the chain. Sometimes it will put it before the transient shaper or whatever, and adjust as it feels like it needs to. And sometimes it won't turn the compressors on or whatever as well if it doesn't think it needs it.
I believe it's in the second drop, but I believe you bring in another lead, like another high element. And I was wondering what that was because it's very beautiful.
There we go. Okay. So this one's virtual Wyatt preset, I think. Yeah, it's essentially just a sine wave with an envelope on the pitch. So it adds like an attack to the sound. I'm kind of in the mindset that if there's a preset out there that does it, then there's no point doing it yourself. Like, it just saves so much time and it sounds great. So especially when it's in someone like virtual Wyatt, because he's such a good producer. So yeah, it's literally just sine wave, envelope on the pitch, like reverb and delay basically. But yeah, as you said, like, it's such a good sounding preset that
Is there something modulating fine pitch as well, or is that?
Yeah, so there's this LFO that controls. The first one's also controlling. FI2, yeah, controlling the fine. So it adds like a vibrato to the sound. Yeah. Cool. And then again, multi-band and just high passing it. Not that it really needs it, I don't think. Oh, there's a little bit of stuff. Yeah, there you go.
Hey DAW Nation, I hope you enjoyed this episode of In the DAW with Elliot Berger, breaking down him and Laura Brehm's song, Believe. Make sure to check out those links in the description for the Patreon, for artist suggestions, for getting private lessons, to enter to win the free consultation, and to get that free preset that Elliot Berger is giving away. Again, it sounds like this. And then finally, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure to check out the In the DAW right before this with Julian Gray. We broke down his song Autonomous that he released on Mousetrap, that's Deadmau5's label, and then also make sure to check out Behind the DAW. We are bringing on people like Pierce Fulton, Wubix, Henry Fong, Kara, so many other people, and I'm also giving away bonus episodes on the podcast where I do social media marketing consultations with these people like Henry Fong, Kara, Wubix. I'm giving it away for free. They're bonus episodes, so if you want that perfect combination of production talk, emotional talk, and social media marketing talk to really help you become well-rounded, extremely knowledgeable artists that you are meant to be. Go ahead, check out Behind the DAW. There is a link in the description. It'll show you all the episodes in there. But with all that being said, DAW Nation, thank you so much for coming through and watching this episode. Make sure to check back here in 2 weeks. We're going to be releasing an episode with Slumberjack. So we'll see you then. And DAW Nation, have a fantastic day, and we'll talk soon.